Welcome to Healthy and Wealthy Conversations, where we discuss everything that leads to health and wellness for your whole spirit, soul, mind, and body. Hello, and welcome to Healthy and Wealthy Conversations. I'm your host, Casey Bell, and today's conversation is with Dr. Rita Louise. Let's get the show started. Well, you've written a book called The Dysfunction Dance of the Empath and Narcissist. Just explain just a little bit, how did you get to this point where, because you're also a doctor, how did you get to this point in your life where you studied this, or where you got to the point to where you felt the need to talk about being in a relationship with narcissists?
So, as I like to say, been there, done that, and wrote a book about it. And so I have a history of getting into toxic relationships. And, the subtitle of the book is, have healthy relationships, heal childhood trauma, and so people that get into unhealthy relationships usually come from a history of trauma. And so it's what it's what you're comfortable with or what you're familiar with. And so when you grow into being an adult, it's kind of like no one necessarily told you what right looks like. And so you just do what you think is the right thing, but it might not be healthy or beneficial for you. And so I wrote the book because I found patterns in my life that I was unaware of before. And again, this history of getting into not healthy relationships. And as part of my own healing, wanted to understand what was going on. And, I'm very open to listening to spirit and, following the direction that God kind of puts inside of me. And very early on, it seemed like this was something I was supposed to write about and share kind of my journey, although the book is not biographical, but share my journey with other people so that they can experience healing and find happiness in their lives.
So obviously the first step in dealing with bad relationships, a person would first have to acknowledge and admit, which is challenging, maybe their childhood wasn't what it needed to be or should have been. I know, because I guess we're taught not to disrespect our elders. As adults, we're fearful of admitting that maybe our parents didn't do their job right, or maybe we grew up in a wrong home. So sometimes people won't admit that, causing them not to stop getting into bad relationships. So how does someone get to the point to where they take that first step of acknowledging that they're in a bad relationship because they, for whatever reason, was in a home with a bad relationship and they just haven't acknowledged it? How does someone finally get to the point where they need to acknowledge that?
Well, and I think one of the key factors is, being honest with yourself. A lot of the times people just kind of take whatever is going on and accept bad behavior. If you are grow up in a toxic household, mom and dad might yell at each other. There might be physical abuse. There might be alcohol or drugs involved, and you just take that as this is part of life, and you don't think that there's something wrong or that you can have better, And one of the things that I've learned is that it's our responsibility to make ourselves happy. And so if we're not happy, then we have to step up to the plate and say, okay, so what's going on? What's making me not be happy? And then evaluate it. Is it the relationship? Are there issues going on in the relationship? Or is there something going on inside of me that is causing me to not be happy? And then make a decision based on that. Many times in relationships, you break up with someone and all you really do is blame the other person for everything that happened. And many times people don't take, an inventory of what did I bring to the table? What did I do wrong that got me in this situation in the first place? And until you take that inventory, you're just going to recreate that same thing. And, it's going to play out in the same way or in a similar way, and not, you're not going to grow. You're not going to, it's not going to change.
One of the things, because you mentioned when people get out of a relationship, one of the main things they say, it wasn't my fault, it was their fault. And unless you're in an arranged marriage, you chose that person. So if nothing else, that was your fault because you chose the wrong person. In the same breath, you shouldn't look at it as, fault as in shame and guilt. Just, well, why did I choose this person?
Mhm.
So I don't know if you've noticed on the internet, I've definitely noticed, definitely YouTube and Instagram, I'm seeing many people talk about narcissists and narcissism and dealing with it. And I'm seeing it more now than I've seen it ever.
Mhm.
What exactly is a narcissist?
So a narcissist is someone who is very self-centered, and they want to have what they want. And so, we all have a little bit of narcissism, or it's good to have a little bit of narcissistic characteristics because it makes sure that we take care of ourselves, and look out for ourselves. And so it's on a spectrum, from I've had clients who didn't take care of themselves at all, to people that have what's called narcissistic personality disorder, which is a cluster B personality disorder, along with being a psychopath or having borderline personality disorder. And that's considered a psychiatric condition, but you can be anywhere on that spectrum and still be self-centered and not necessarily take other people's thoughts, feelings, and emotions into account, because it's more important for you to have your needs met versus wanting your partner to be happy. And one of the things about the dynamic, which is why I wrote about the empath and the narcissist, is that people that are empaths, people that tend to be more sensitive, tend to be more giving. They tend to be more open. They tend to pick up on the other person's feeling. It's like, oh, well, there's something going on with them. What do I need to do to fix them or heal them and make them feel better? Because then I feel better because I'm picking up your distress. And people that tend to be more narcissistic, they feed off of those people because they're, the empath, especially if you are an unhealed empath, and we can come back to that if you want, isn't really good at having boundaries. And so, they give, and the narcissist takes, and that relationship, that dynamic might work for a while, but not necessarily, it leaves the empath unhappy. But if the empath decides, well, I'm going to have some boundaries, or I'm going to look out for me, it makes the narcissist unhappy, and so it just creates this dynamic that is dysfunctional.
So there's the empath and there's the narcissist, and I'm pretty sure no one is born this way. Their childhood. The thing is, unfortunately, we don't get to choose our parents, and we don't get to choose their characteristics, and we don't get to choose the fact that maybe our parents themselves don't even notice that they're either an empath or a narcissist. So once maybe someone's watching and they're looking back and they're saying, okay, maybe I do give way too much, or I'm taking too much, I'm too selfish. What is like a step that they can take to begin to change? And second question, if they're already in a relationship, should they break up to deal with themselves, or can they deal with themselves while in that relationship?
Okay. So, and I've joked around about this before. So someone who's a pretty hardcore narcissist would never read my book because they're really not interested in changing. They're interested in having what they want. Or if they did read it, they would find their friends or their associates that are even more narcissistic than them, which would make them believe, well, I'm an empath. Because they're not very good at self-reflecting, where the empath is, that's kind of one of those characteristics. They're always looking to improve themselves. They really want to understand what's going on. And so of the two, they're the ones that are going to be more willing to make changes, more willing to adjust, and I hate to say the word compromise. So hopefully people that are in a relationship, with a not so narcissistic person, then change in the relationship is possible. But that person that you're in the relationship with needs to be willing to change and accommodate your needs and not just their own. And if they're not, then really, there are two choices. You can stay in the relationship and not really be happy and not really have your needs met, or you can choose to leave.
Okay, so can we go back now to you said an unhealed empath?
Okay, so and you're definitely correct. I believe that they both come from situations of trauma. And let me talk about the empath here for a little bit. And so there are people that are born into this world that are more sensitive, just in the general sense of the word. They're just more sensitive. What I have found in my research is that people that tend to be more empathic. And so what I mean by empathic is you're sensitive to energy, and so if somebody's in a bad mood, now you're feeling their bad mood. And so if you're not aware, have self-awareness, now you think you're in a bad mood. But then you get away from that person and it's like, oh, I'm fine. My ongoing joke is, if you can navigate Walmart, even with a list, and walk out with everything on your list and not be freaking out after, the 15 minutes or half hour you're in the store, then you're probably not an empath. Because any person that I know that's an empath, that's, environments like that are just very challenging because you can get overloaded with energy because you're like a giant sponge and you're just taking on all of this energy from around. Again, part of my research, one of the things that I found, so I belong to a group on Facebook. And so I did a survey and asked the question, and it was in a group of empaths, quote unquote, and the question was something to the effect of, based on your life, okay, so you're a self-acknowledged empath. So based on your life, did you have a happy family life, or was it a life of trauma? And I really had no predisposition of one way or the other. I was just kind of curious what would come up. And clearly over 85% of the people that responded, and I had a pretty good response, all came from families of trauma. But if you think about it, it really makes sense. And so mommy and daddy are fighting, and so your little antenna are up, wanting to know if it's safe. Daddy's an alcoholic and he just opened the door, and you're reaching out with your little spidey sense to see if he's drunk or not. And so you're always kind of like feeling into the room and feeling into other people to know if that's a safe space for you. And so think about that. You have 18, maybe more years growing up in that environment, you kind of become an expert at feeling that out. But also with that, you also get all of the dysfunction. And so people that are, I kind of classified as an unhealed empaths, they tend to be more people pleasers. They tend to be, a fawning type, and they tend to be codependent. Because those are strategies that made their world be safe, that made their life in their family unit safe. And so when they get into a relationship, they just, that's what they know to do as far as being in a relationship dynamic, is to do things to make that other person happy, which is great for the narcissist.
Right. So basically, if you are an unhealed empath, you are more likely to attract a narcissist.
Correct.
And if you are a narcissist, I guess your attraction, if you come against another narcissist, that's never going to work out. You're more likely to be attracted to an empath.
Correct.
So in dealing, I guess, with yourself, how how does someone, well, because I guess you're saying that empaths are more unlikely to change, as narcissists is not as likely for them to, basically they're going to die a narcissist is basically what you're saying. Okay, so it's rare for a narcissist, a 100% narcissist, to get to the point of saying I need to change.
So, both of them come from trauma, both people, except the empath tends to be more open to looking inside and self-reflection and self-evaluation. And I don't necessarily mean everybody, but more often than not. Where a narcissist, that pain is so hurtful to them that they don't even want to look at it. They don't want to feel it. They don't want to experience it. And they, on some levels, don't even want to admit it. And so, you have to recognize that there's a problem before you can start to fix the problem. I mean, it can't be me if I'm perfect.
Right, right, right. So you are a soul healer. What exactly would you say that means?
So I work with people. So I'm a medical intuitive. So I use my intuition to help people with health issues, whether it's a physical, emotional, or spiritual issue. And then I use a lot of tools to help bring, there's who we are on the inside. And even though there might be wounding sitting on the top, there is our core essence, our soul. And so what I do is I help people kind of break through their own limitations so that they can, find healing, whether it's from trauma or find healing because there's something functionally going on wrong with them. But one of the things that I have found in my work as a medical intuitive that, at least 90% of the health issues we experience, there is always an emotional piece tied to it. There's always some very, very old belief that's holding it in place. And so you can sit there and give somebody a ton of supplements and put them on a diet, but unless they fix the core of themselves, it's really not fully going to go away. It might move it into the background, take it out of the physical body into the more subtle bodies, but it doesn't really heal it, and I'll just throw this little aside in. I'll work with a client and I'll, be talking about some health issue and I'll go, oh, well, I kind of get this impression when you were like 23, that something happened and you really felt betrayed and blah, blah, blah. And I'll just go on and on. And then they go, oh, well, I'm over that. And I'm like, no, you're not, because it's in your body. And if I can see it in your body, that means you haven't resolved it. And it's, and it's sitting underneath your health issue. So it's not fixed. And so, when I work with people, I might give them supplements or a diet or whatever, but also work with that core part so that they can actually experience healing.
Oh, thank you for doing that. I personally believe most, even if they, die a heart attack, stroke, or they, diabetes, whatever, even if it's physical, I still think most people die from more emotional and heartaches than physical, because the overeating or the bad eating is just a cover up for whatever they're choosing not to deal with. With that said, last question I want to ask you. So even if someone decides not to admit, okay, I'm not an empath or I'm not a narcissist, but they can admit that maybe their childhood or their household or their parents or guardians or whoever, even if they're someone who was like raised in a foster home their whole life and they never really had parents, if they can at least admit that as a child, things were not what they could, it wasn't healthy. It wasn't a mentally, emotionally healthy childhood. What are some of the things, if they're watching right now, they can start to do to get on that journey, I say journey of healing, because healing is definitely not an event. It's a journey that can take years, decades before you get to that, that resolve. So what is something or some things they can do to start,
And I think just being honest with yourself, and looking at what the dynamics in the family were. I mean, in my book, like the first part of the book is really about people taking a self-assessment of what was going on, what was going on with your parents, how did that affect you? What was your place? Were you the golden child or were you the scapegoat? Were you the invisible one? There are a lot of people who experience, and I'm going to say abuse, so maybe mom and dad are alcoholics, but they're not violent alcoholics. So there's not any physical abuse happening, but there's other things that are going on. And so, that still weighs a toll on you. And a lot of people don't recognize it. Physical abuse is very obvious. Emotional abuse or verbal abuse is a lot subtler, but it can affect us on a lot of different levels. And just kind of taking an inventory, because one of the things that they would find is that their thoughts and their beliefs that formed during that period that's what they're operating on. It's kind of like a little computer program, and you were programmed, from 0 to, 15, and whatever those programs say, that's how you're going to operate in the world, whether it's in a romantic relationship or in a personal relationship. And so, evaluating that and looking at your shortfalls, and then making a commitment to yourself that it's something that you're going to change, that this isn't working for me. And so what do I need to do to change it? And sometimes it's a nail biting, white knuckle, you're hanging onto the chair while you're like taking this step. But when you do, it makes life better, because you find out that the world doesn't come to an end. You don't get the smack up the side of the head. You can do that. Saying no to someone, having a boundary. Boundaries about saying no. This is what I need to do. And so for many people that came from toxic households that aren't narcissists, really have a hard time doing that. And so sometimes the first time you choose to vocalize what you're thinking and what you're feeling, you might have this giant lump in your throat, or you might be shaking, or whatever it is. But until you move past that fear, you're never going to change anything, because you are allowing it to control you versus what you need for you.
Thank you so much. So your website will be appearing on the screen. I'm pretty sure that's where they can get a copy of your book and read it and hopefully start the process. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the viewers?
And so there's my book. And so there's also a whole bunch of articles that I've written in this past. So the book released a little over a year ago, and then I've written a bunch of new articles. And so there's a whole series on healing trauma, that there's stuff in the book, but then there's new material that is on the webpage. So, if they enjoy the book, or if they enjoy the material that's on the webpage, because they're really related, I hope that they explore it and that it helps them to understand themselves better.
Thank you, Dr. Rita Louise, for stopping on by and sharing so much vital information. I hope you, the audience, were listening. And if you need it, make sure you take the time to start your healing journey. Thank you again, Dr. Rita Louise, for stopping on by. And audience, thank you for watching. Have a great day.